Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about drone strike, massive drone strike that took place during the previous 24 hours. This attack was carried out by the Ukrainians. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation this evening gave us some updates, some numbers regarding that attack, and according to Russians, the Ukrainians used up to 121 drones. So over the course of the past night, the air defense systems on duty intercepted and destroyed 121 Ukrainian drones. So 37 were destroyed over the territory of Bryansk region, 20 over the territory of Ryazan region, 17 over the territory of the Kursk region, and 17 over the territory of the Saratov region, 7 over the territory of the Rostov region, and 6 over the territory of Moscow. So as you can see, the Ukrainians were attacking Russian positions, mainly the energy facilities all over the entire territory, almost all over the entire territory of Russia, at least the territory of Russia that is used by Russia for military purposes to continue the special military operation. The Russians once again reported they managed to bring down almost everything, but the Ukrainian sources published lots of videos of consequences of this attack. For example, this is the video that came to us from the city of Bryansk. In this video we can see very heavy explosion, and the most likely some building or some facilities were destroyed, or the Russians managed to bring down the drone, but this is just the consequences of parts that fell down. Furthermore, according to information we have, very heavy explosions took place on the territory of the city of Ryazan. And as for this city, the Ukrainians managed to damage or destroy fuel depots and oil refinery plants. Very heavy explosion, as you can see. The Ukrainians managed to break through the Russians' air defense and to hit the target. Once again, maybe the Russians managed to destroy the drones, and this is just the consequences of parts that fell down from those destroyed drones. We don't know for sure, but as for this picture, as for this video, it basically doesn't matter whether the Russians destroyed Ukrainian drones or the Ukrainian drones reach the target, because anyway, the consequences of attack are very heavy. I would like to remind you that the Ukrainians attacked the territory of Russia once again. Most likely in the near future, the Russians will attack deep inside of Ukraine, trying to destroy Ukraine energy facilities, and there may be going to be another day of complete blackout or something like this, but it's not the most important. The most important is the pattern. Ukrainians have a certain pattern of behavior. I'll remind you that probably since the autumn or late summer of 2024, the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the Russian oil facilities, oil refinery, fuel depots, and so on, just with one purpose: to prevent massive missile strike from the territory of Russian Federation. I'll remind you that the last time the Ukrainians attacked deep inside of Russia, all these events took place somewhere probably in the middle of January. Let's take a look at the map, and we're gonna see, and we're gonna find this out. Yes, for example, there was a very heavy explosion on Kazan on between the 30th and the 40th on January. So the last time the Ukrainians attacked deep inside the territory of Russia took place basically 10 days ago. And when the Ukrainians attacked 10 days ago the territory of Russia, all these oil energy facilities, the main purpose of those attacks from the Ukrainian side was to prevent massive missile strike. For example, this video came to us from the territory of the city of Saratov, and this is the consequences of attack. We see that another fuel depot was damaged, and this situation, those attacks 10 days ago allowed the Ukrainians to reduce the number of missiles and the number of planes that the Russians used the day after to attack deep inside of Ukraine. So this is the pattern. So the Ukrainians, probably after 3 years of the special military operation, found a solution, maybe not to prevent the massive missile strike completely, but at least to reduce the number of planes that the Russians can use. And the only way is to attack fuel depots that later the Russians tried to use to, let's say, to charge their planes or something like this. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely as a result of intelligence information, the Ukrainians managed managed to discover, or of course the MI6 maybe, or CIA managed to provide Ukrainians additional information that the Russians were planning to begin or to launch another massive missile strike in the upcoming days. So that's why the Ukrainians try to destroy fuel depot before, in advance. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, obviously. Another important thing, that if the Ukrainians manage to find a solution how to reduce the number of planes, strategical aviation like MiG, like two, with the purpose to attack deep inside of Ukraine, there is still problem that is coming from the Black Sea. Because when talking about the Black Sea, there are caliber carriers that have no problems to came into the open sea and to attack deep inside of Ukraine. And today we got very interesting article that was published by the Ukrainian side, and the US Air Force is developing new relatively cheap high precision air launch cruise missile for Ukraine that can be used against ships using quick sink seeker technology. That was stated by the war zone. So in this video we can see most likely the tests or military exercises with the use of this bomb or this cruise missile. In this video we can see a ship, standalone ship somewhere in the ocean or in the sea, and then aircraft attacked the ship, and as a result of this attack the ship was completely destroyed. So obviously this is very dangerous technology, because if the Ukrainians will get this technology and will begin attacking Russian ships, this can bring significant problems, and also from this perspective this will reduce the risk from the Black Sea. So this is at least the situation, how the Ukrainians are trying to find a solution, how to reduce the massive missile strike deep inside to Ukraine, because Ukrainians understand without energy facilities, without electricity, they will not be able to do anything. And so the first thing they need to do is to reduce the number of massive missile strikes. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the northern direction, about the territory of the Sudzha. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of the settlement by the name of Nikoisky. This video was published by the 82nd Separatist Air Assault Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine in this of Russian Federation. In this video we can see the Russians that were attacking the settlement of Nikoisky, and how the 82nd Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine was trying to repel this attack. We see lots of artillery strikes, we see FPV drone strikes, we see that most likely several tanks and fighting vehicles were destroyed and damaged, and many other interesting episodes from this territory, and several episodes were located in this part, along the road between the settlement of Nikoisky and the settlement of Viktorovka. Based on this video we have adjusted a map, and now we can make a conclusion that the Russians most likely control the western part of the settlement of Nikoisky and Viktor, trying to develop their positions further in the eastern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Malaya Loknya from the west and from the southwest. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is very interesting. Probably the most important updates from the Sudzha direction are coming from the settlement of Sverdlikova. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the 8 Russian positions, most likely on the territory of the cemetery, and we see that the Ukrainians were using cluster munition with the purpose to destroy the Russian manpower. Based on this video we have adjusted the map, because this is 100% proof that as a result of some offensive operation, the Russians managed to enter the northwestern part of Sverdlikova, and the Russians basically began offensive operation with the purpose to take complete control the settlement of Sverdlikova. Now let's discuss the situation in the southeastern direction. As for this territory, during the previous 24 hours we got another batch of videos of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian FPV drones above the territory of the settlement, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians published the video how they bombed and destroyed some temporary deployment point of the Armored Forces of Ukraine in the northeastern part of the settlement of Sudzha. So the situation remains stable in the south and the southeastern direction, and the situation is very difficult in the north and the northwestern directions. So let's wait and see what the Russians are going to do next. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received almost anything from the Russian bank or from the Russian foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river Oskol. Just several vehicles, probably evacuation teams, were destroyed by the Russians when the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate wounded soldiers. That's it, nothing special. Most likely there are very heavy clashes, but no changes for the previous 24 hours. The same story from the central Kupyansk direction. We have lots of artillery strikes, how the Russians were bombing the attacking the Ukrainian edge positions, how the Russians were trying to destroy Ukrainians during the rotation process, how the Russians were destroying the temporary deployment points of the armored force of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia, but as you can see, once again, without any changes on the ground. Now let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupyansk direction, or the Liman direction, where the Russians and the Ukrainians continue fighting, very, very difficult, bloody fightings for the dense network of the fortifications between the settlement of Kolodezi and Ivanovka. During the previous 24 hours, during the previous maybe 48 hours, the Ukrainians, or even more, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts to counterattack the Russian positions in the southwestern part of Ivanovka. In this video, we can see another group of the Ukrainians that landed in the vicinity of the Kolodezi, but the Ukrainians were discovered by the Russians, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory, dealing the Ukrainians significant losses. So anyway, based on this video, we have adjusted this part in Ukrainian favor, but maybe tomorrow we will adjust this territory back in Russian favor based on some video published from the Russian side. Once again, there are very heavy clashes, but when talking about the Russian side, they have several benefits in this battle. According to information we have, the Russians have redeployed a significant number of North Korean artillery systems, Kaksan, 170mm artillery systems, and starting this week, the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in this area. These Kaksan 170mm systems are long-range systems, and basically the Ukrainians don't know any solution how to, let's say, to counterfight these artillery systems, so that's why the Ukrainians suffer losses. And the most important is that the Russians using these artillery systems can attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. They don't need for these purposes Iskander systems or another type of weapons. They can use just regular artillery systems and to destroy the Ukrainian temporary deployment point much further behind the Ukrainian edge positions along the line of combat contact. Let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything from this area. But telling the truth, right before we start making video, we got another, let's say, episode of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the southern part of the city of Chasiv Yar. Maybe there are going to be some map changes, but we will discuss this video tomorrow in the morning on the 25th of January of 2025. As for the city of Toretsk, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything at all. As you can see, no changes, no icons, and it's very difficult to understand what exactly is happening right now here. Maybe the Russians are trying to keep the situation in pause, in silence, trying not to provide additional information about the situation on the ground. Maybe the city of Toretsk was captured by the Russians long time ago, but neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians want to reveal this information because it's like very important city that the Russians can use for further offensive operation in the north and the northwestern direction. Anyway, we can say for sure that most likely due to complete absence of any icons, of any activities, any updates from this area, we can make a conclusion that the Russians are conducting a major regrouping in this area with the purpose to advance further in the northwestern direction and the northern directions towards the city of Konstantinovka. And this attack is going to be most likely very, very hard. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. As you can see, according to the map, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published another batch of videos of how they were attacking the Ukrainian forces on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk itself. Several vehicles that Ukrainians were using for different purposes were destroyed, and this allowed the Russians to destroy and ruin Ukrainian logistic, and this is like regular activities before any offensive operation the Russians carried out since the beginning of the special military operation. As for the southwestern direction, as you can see, we have adjustments on map based on the videos that was published by the Ukrainian side. Let's compare the map between two dates. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly between the settlement of Kotlina and the settlement of Udachna by taking under control additional territories. We came to this based on the video that was published by 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade. This is the brigade that was trained in France, and we had lots of bad updates about this brigade in the past. In this video we can see Russian soldiers that were moving through the fields, and the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians here. So, and another video published also by 155th Mechanized Brigade. In this video we can see very heavy clashes, artillery strikes on Russian troopers that were moving along these tree line. So based on these two episodes, we have adjusted the map in the fields, along the railways, and to the south of the railways. Also, the Ukrainians published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians to the north of the settlement of Kotlina. Some temporary deployment point of the armed force of Russian Federation was attacked by Ukrainian FPV drones. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in this part. So as you can see, the Russians continue offensive, but now we see that the Russians were trying to attack in the northwestern direction. Most likely there are several purposes of this maneuver. First of all, to outflank the city of Udachno, the town of Udachno, from the northeast and from the north, and another task is to attack in the direction of the mine of Pokrovsk. If the Russians are able to take this mine of Pokrovsk under complete control, as you can see, this might be a very powerful stronghold and the base for the Russians for further offensive operation in many directions, like in the western direction, in the northern, or in the eastern. And the Russians need this territory with the purpose to stabilize the lines and to be 100% sure that Ukrainians will not be able to counterattack the Russians and to restore control over these strategical points. Furthermore, according to pro-Ukrainian sources Deep State, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern direction of the settlement of Udachne. So now we see that after the Russians secured the eastern flank, we're talking about the settlement of Kotlina, the Russians began advancing in the direction of Udachne. If the town of Udachne falls, then the distance between the possible Russian edge positions and the border with the Dnipro region will be less than 3.1 kilometers, so it's nothing already. And most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions on the territory of the settlement of Molodetska because the village is too small, and most likely the Russians will advance further in the western direction. As for the fields, according to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions to the north of Novoandreevka. I'll remind you that just yesterday we got reports that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south of Novoandreevka, so we see that the village was caught in pincers and the Russians continue advancing. Most likely tomorrow the village would be completely colored in Russian favor. As for the Kurakhove direction, according to information we have, the Ukrainians for the 2 days in a row counterattack the Russian units. And for example, yesterday we got the video of how the Ukrainians were counterattacking in the direction of Kurakhove power station. We don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to restore positions lost during the Russian offensive operation. But as for this counterattack, I have lots of questions. You know, the Russians just a week or two ago established complete control over the settlement of Kurakhove. They raised the flag, they announced the victory in the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation announced the victory, and now we see how the Ukrainians from this Dachne pocket, from this artillery trap, still have possibilities and forces to counterattack and to ruin some Russian plans. So as a result of this counteroffensive, we haven't adjusted the map, but maybe we should have updated the map at least on the territory of these facilities. So let's wait and see. Maybe the Russians restore control over this area, but the situation is interesting. We discussed this counterattack that took place yesterday because today we got another update that most likely the Ukrainians counterattack also on the line between the settlement of Andreevka and the settlement of Shevchenka. And as a result of this counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to restore their positions, and we have colored this dense network of the fortifications in Russian favor. We came to this based on the video that was published by the Russian side. In this video we can see a vehicle that Ukrainians were trying to hide in these fortifications, but the vehicle was discovered and destroyed by the Russians as a result of FPV drone attack. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of Velyka Novosilka. The situation for the Ukrainians here is very critical. The Russians managed to establish control for more than 40% of the settlement. Around 99% of the settlement is considered as a contested area or the area covered with the fog of war. And according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Ukrainians control just 1% of the settlement of Velyka Novosilka. So this is the map that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. 40% under complete Russian control, 59% in the gray zone or considered as a contested area, and just 1% the buildings along the Pervilny line is under complete Ukrainian control. So the Ukrainians most likely keep some forces in this area with the purpose to organize and to stabilize the evacuation process. Now let's discuss in details. The Russians this morning probably first there were lots of flags, lots of map updates provided by different mappers. Neutral mappers updated their maps, pro-Ukrainian sources updated their maps, pro-Russian resources updated their maps, and several hours after the first video was published by the Russian side. In this video we can see how the Russians were entering the settlement of Velyka Novosilka from the southeast, how the Russians were moving through farms, entering the village without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side. Based on this video and based on the flag that was raised by the Russians in the last episode of this video, we adjusted this part of Velyka Novosilka completely. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 23rd of January. As you can see, the central part was under complete Ukraine control, and this is the situation by the end of the 24th of January, and the southeastern part and the central part is already almost under complete Russian control. We later this evening, somewhere at 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. of Ukrainian time, we got another video. In this video we can see the same story. Two Russian soldiers were raising the Russian flag above the building in the vicinity of the stadium. This is not the Russian flag, this is just a sign of the units that were involved in the Velyka Novosilka offensive operation, but we have no doubts that these territories were secured already by the Russians, and obviously the Russians continue advancing. I understand in my projection that most likely within the next 48 hours the settlement of Velyka Novosilka will be taken by the Russians completely. But we still have some questions regarding the southern part of Velyka Novosilka, because we continue receiving updates that there are lots of Ukrainians that were trapped and caught in cauldron. Some sources are saying that there are up to 1,500 Ukrainians that were caught in cauldron and abandoned by their commanders, and some part of this 1,500 were caught by the Russians in the southern part. So anyway, we expect that most likely there are going to be a lot of videos with Ukrainians that surrender. So let's wait and see, and I think that we can start counting not even days but already hours before the end of the Velyka Novosilka offensive operation. And no, the most important is not how many days left, and the most important is what is going to be next, because after the fall of Velyka Novosilka the Russians enters the operational space, and then they can do whatever they like and so begin advancing further in the western directions to the city of Zaporizhzhia and to the city of Dnipro. As for the Kurakhove direction, during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian equipment that was established, installed on the buildings, the equipment that Ukrainians were using for reconnaissance purposes, for communication, many other things, and the Russians destroyed lots of them. And before any offensive operation, usually the Russians first destroy equipment and then they begin offensive. Maybe we can expect something in the Kurakhove direction as well, and most likely if anything happens in the Kurakhove direction, this will begin at the same time with the complete collapse and complete fall in Russian hands of the town of Velyka Novosilka. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.